My name is Skulk Netlin, and this is the Mechanical Ink podcast, a podcast about open source, the open web, sustainability, and those who want to make the web and the world a better place. Hey, Abby and Naytri, thanks so much for joining me on the Mechanical Ink podcast.
Thanks for having
us.
It's a huge pleasure. So, to let the cat out of the bag, you're both from GitHub, and we are quite a big fans, to put it mildly, of GitHub and everything that GitHub does. And I've known Abby for quite some time. And so when I started with this podcast idea, that it's like the second one I'm doing, I thought and I heard the announcements at the recent GitHub Universe. I was like, I wonder if I can make this happen. And so I reached out and wow, I was so pleasantly surprised that you were so open to this. So again, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate this. And I'm excited to share all the great stuff we'll talk about today with the larger community. With all of that said, can we get a little bit of background on the two of you and what's your roles at GitHub and in the open source ecosystem?
Yeah, for sure. I can kick us off, if that's okay. Thanks, Naytri. So hi, I'm Abby Cabunoc. I lead GitHub's open source maintainer programs where we engage, invest, and advocate for open source maintainers. I joined about 6 months ago because I really do want to be supporting maintainers. So Skulk, like you mentioned, we work together at Mozilla, so it's so great to reconnect here. But I actually started my career in cancer research. So I was writing web apps for scientists so that they could do some data analysis and data visualization. And this was really meaningful work for me. My grandmother had passed away from cancer. So this idea that I was helping someone else's grandmother was really powerful. But the longer I was there, the more I realized how often researchers sometimes fudge their data a bit or maybe not even share it just to further their own career and get cool discoveries out there. And, I found that was outraging. That's why, now I care so much about open source and open science. I think the best innovations happen when we are doing things in the open and sharing the results that we have. So since then, I've spent my career really supporting the open source ecosystem, both for scientists and now more broadly. And through this work, I've seen that maintainers have truly an outsized impact on this space. They shape how the communities collaborate. They're the ones that are securing funding often. They're the ones that ensure that the projects function sustainably. So I'm really excited to be here at GitHub, where I'm in a role where I can truly be supporting those maintainers and helping more of this open source happen.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I had no idea about your early start. Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, so for me, I came to GitHub about 4 years ago, and I had always sort of been involved in open source on an adjacency level. So I was running an engineering team at Palantir, my former employer, and we were using a ton of Cassandra frameworks and software. And I remember there was this point in the middle of the night in London one day, and we were like, we don't know what the hell we're doing, actually. Maybe we should get someone who's an expert that we can actually talk to. And we realized that we had no one that we could actually reach out to. And I remember going to GitHub and saying there's this one contributor, maybe they'll speak to us, let's reach out. And there was this whole shenanigans around how we were going to contact this person. We finally got them online. And we're like, we will literally do anything if you will just spend an hour with us, please. And they ended up being really helpful and, helping push our product forward. And I remember that. And so when GitHub was acquired by Microsoft back in 2018, I joined as part of the new leadership team. I was chief of staff to the CEO, Nathan Friedman. And really my biggest passion for joining was how do we get the open source community out front and center? How do we support them? How do we actually build so that, like Abby was saying, all of these maintainers really have the tools that they need as well as the support that they need to be super successful? Because like Abby, I believe that open source really does push us forward. We're not all doing the same work. In fact, we can all leverage each other. It's the biggest team sport that I can think of across the globe. And so I was chief of staff to Nat. We did a ton of different initiatives like GitHub sponsors. I'm sure we'll get into that later. And then now I'm working within the CEO's office for Thomas, who's our new GitHub CEO, and really focus on the open source economy. So how do we get the right players, both from the company side as well as the developer side, matched up and working together so that open source not only can survive over the next decade, but really thrive. And so that's kind of the focus and why we've launched these last two programs that Skulk, you just talked about, the accelerator and the fund. And I'm sure we'll get into it just now. So that's kind of the background on me.
Great. Yeah, thanks. That's exciting. Yeah, for sure. No, I also definitely want open source ecosystem to thrive. And I do feel like GitHub is playing a key role there. And talking to that, I think one of the main announcements was made during Universe in 2022. I believe that's the year. So there's a couple of ones. So one of the ones is where you're literally investing in the stack that you depend on. And that is really cool. You don't often see that. And I hope that sets a precedent for the industry to like take note that, you know, it's the thing you should do. If you're relying on open source to build your business, then you really should invest back into your own stack at the very least. But GitHub, of course, is going above and beyond that, and we'll dig into some of those things. But I know some of the stuff that kicked all of this off was a pilot program that was run in India called OS Grants. I'm curious if you can share anything about the experience of running that program and if there's any like specific lessons that came out of that then influenced all these new initiatives.
Yeah, so Karan, who sits in the GitHub DevRel team, really brought that program to life. He was super instrumental. And, one of the biggest learnings was sometimes developers just need the time and the space to go experiment. As a maintainer, often what happened is you threw something out there that scratched your own itch and you're like, well, I'm going to give this back to the community. And then, fast forward 6 months later and you get, 20 issues a day of people asking you to do this or do that. And you're thinking to yourself, gosh, I really love this project. I very much want to work on it, but I also have a full-time job and a family and a life. And, this impending doom of issue lists is just coming over the edge and kind of crushing me under the weight. And so, you often see maintainers have these almost apology posts. And I'm like, don't apologize. Like, you're doing something great for us. So they need the time, they need the space to actually say, well, what if this could be something real? What should I be doing? And GitHub doesn't want to be the person who's telling everyone this is how the market should work. And so the OS Grants program was really an experiment. It was like, well, if we just gave you the money so you would have the time, what happens next? And I think one of the coolest things that came out of that program was, two of the maintainers, I'll just use two as an example. There were 20 in the group, but two were sort of stuck out. Peter Thomas, who runs Karate Labs, and Leas Thomas, who runs, no relation, totally different people and families. Leas Thomas, who runs Hopscotch now, both kind of came out of that program and then ended up doing other things and raising money, joining YC, becoming full-fledged open source companies. And that was really exciting to us. And we thought, well, if more people had this and you had more examples, and not just examples that were going into venture-backed startup paths, we could really paint a path for more maintainers that you don't have to just feel crushed by the weight of the expectations of the community and then doing this on nights and weekends, but you could actually, make this a full-time career or make this a full-time company. And we wanted to start with an experiment. We also started in India because it's the fastest growing geography for GitHub. And, we've added more developers in India in the last year than there were on GitHub in 2012, 10 years ago, which is really quite stark from a single region.
Wow.
And so, so we were excited about being able to support this and then also going global. And so it really became kind of the seed crystal or the impetus for us building out a more full-fledged program with the GitHub Accelerator, which we launched back at Universe a couple of weeks ago here.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Abby?
Well, I was just going to say it is really interesting to see, seeing the engagement in India specifically. I know they had the longest wait list for sponsors. So when it was launched, it suddenly, I know Yeah, they're some of the top people on sponsors now. So it's exciting just to see it grow and see this expand.
That's great. Yeah. So
actually, Abby, I wonder if
no, go for it.
Oh, sorry, Scald. I wonder if it makes sense for us to talk a little bit about the journey here, because I would say, OS Grants was sort of our first experiment on a program side, but back in 2019 was our first big experiment in this space. We launched sponsors, which, you go to any GitHub profile that has sponsors turned on, you can actually just with a single click next to the code that you're using, go and sponsor a developer, whether that it's you as an individual. And we also have a beta program right now for companies to go do that. And what we've seen over the last 3 years is so many people want to be able to do this. I mean, I think people were sort of kind of Frankenstein monstering this together, right? Like Open Collective and so many other companies in the space are also doing this to support maintainers out there. But it's always, you go to the website and people are like, well, you can buy me a cup of coffee and like, this will help me sort of fuel my night work this day or that day. And with sponsors, what we really wanted to formalize was this idea that you should be working in open source. It should be out in the open, but it shouldn't be completely unpaid. It shouldn't be something that we expect from you just because you happen to have donated your prior time and energy and talent to the community. And so sponsors has really had this great rise over the last 3 years. We've seen a ton of different examples of people experimenting. Caleb Porzio is one person. He's done a couple of podcasts and things. You should definitely check him out. But he sort of came on to sponsors in 2019, 2020, I want to say. And his objective was like, well, can I make $100,000 a year? Can I replace my paycheck for my employer on sponsors? And very rapidly, he actually did. And I remember seeing that example and just getting such a surge of energy. I was like, wow, okay, you should be able to do this. And, there have been other people who have been using sponsors. Sindra, who is a very long time GitHub contributor, maintainer, developer, he's very active in the community. He has he has, I think, the highest count of sponsors overall. You also see folks like Evan Yu from Vue.js, who has built an incredible community, an incredible organization that is really making sure that Vue has both resiliency and sustainability outside of just his contributions, which I find to be really interesting. And so Sponsors has gone through this really great journey over the last 3 years. And then with OS Grants, the kind of lesson that we're learning is you just need more of them. Like we need more kind of tinkering and experimentation in this space. And in some ways, GitHub, we just want to be the matchmaker. Like, okay, you want to go do this. Here are the 4 or 5 mentors that you can go talk to. And then here are the 4 or 5 profiles that you should be able to just fork and create as your sponsor's profile. And then here are the, several companies that depend on your software today. And in some ways, like you were saying, Skulk, actually give back because the software that you created powers their products that they make, thousands or millions or billions of dollars off of. And that volunteer work should be recognized and appreciated and maintained over time. So, we've gone through the sponsors trajectory. And now we're sort of coming back and saying, what are the small, cool experiments that we can do to give developers that time to really focus on their open source projects?
Yeah. And Skulk, I know you mentioned bulk sponsorships a little bit at the beginning, and we did experiment with that back in June as part of Maintainer Month. We had $500,000 and we wanted to see, can we as GitHub distribute this to all our dependencies? So we found all the dependencies that GitHub as the org and all of our other orgs, we have a lot of them, uses. And there are 900 dependencies that had sponsors turned on. So we just split the money evenly between all of them. And part of doing that was like writing some tooling so that we could actually get the money everywhere, because it was quite a manual process before. And so now because of that, bulk sponsorships is on the way. So I'm excited to see this expand, both with investing in these individual maintainers, but also encouraging companies to, pay for your stack or give money back to your stack.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love this way that GitHub at Mozilla, they call it fox fooding. I don't know if you call it octocat feeding or what, but where you use your own product, right? And your own, everything like kind of organically grows out of a need at GitHub that you then fill and then give to the community and say, we found this useful. We're pretty sure you'll find it useful as well. I love that organic growth of GitHub. A couple of things that you've mentioned actually leads me to a different topic that I was thinking of touching on later, but I think it's a good place to do it now. And so I think India, in terms of the regional challenges that they face, and also the growth that you've mentioned. I think Africa resembles that very much. There's a lot of similarities between these two countries, continents, whatever you want to call it. And I think this idea that so the reason why I'm bringing this up, so let me step back a little bit. So I've recently found, so there's two different statistics. I'll talk about the second one a bit later, but of all open source contributions, only 3% comes from Africa. And if you think about the fact that 17% of the world's population live in Africa, then it's kind of mind-boggling to think why such a small percentage of contributions come from the continent of Africa. But it is for the very reasons that you have highlighted. For people in Africa, number one is getting a job, and number two is getting enough money to be able to put food on the table. And if you have any time left after all of that, you might consider contributing to open source. If you have the energy and if you have access to stable infrastructure, which means power, internet, and access to hardware. So, if somebody in Africa had to start an open source project, it would be very hard for them to maintain that long term if they get traction on it, simply because they won't be able to quit their day job and do this. They won't be able to say, I'm going to quit my job, and they'll have to, burn the midnight oil, so to speak, burn the candle at both ends, because they'll have to go to their day job, make the money to put food on the table, and then after hours, spend time working on this project. And I think things are getting better. So in terms of how people view open source, and I think language is very important here. That's why I like this name of ventures and sponsors, because I think it shouldn't be like a donation, because I like the idea of teaching people to fish instead of giving them a fish. So I think that builds continuity and that helps people grow, because later on you can pass it on to the next person. If you've learned and you've grown and you've learned to fish, you can teach the next person how to fish. Instead of if you just get a bunch of money and it's like, ooh, nice. People tend to also not spend it very wisely if it's too easy. So what I'm getting at with all of that is I think these initiatives that GitHub is starting, I know there was some negativity towards it because keep money out of open source, but I think that's the wrong attitude. I think it's one of the things that open source has been missing is real monetary investment in this space. So I'll, stand the line and say that I think what GitHub is doing is the right thing. I'm curious what ideas you have for the African context and similar countries, not just Africa, and how you think these initiatives that GitHub is driving can really impact and allow people in these regions to maybe double that percentage from 3 to 6%.
Yeah, Abby, I can jump in and take this one.
Yeah, so go ahead, yes.
I think, I'm super passionate about this. Back in 2019, I took a trip with the GitHub leadership team to Lagos in Nigeria. And that's only one part of a very large continent. So it's obviously a window into that world, but not the full picture. And the overwhelming feel of the place was everyone who was involved in open source loved being involved because of the community, the amount of learning that they were able to engage with, the actual opportunities that it then created, whether that was job opportunities or other companies that they could join and found together. But at the end of the day, everyone said exactly what you said, Skulk, which is, I need a day job. I don't have the wherewithal, the privilege to be able to not take a paycheck. And open source has allowed me to be discovered, but it is not the place where I can actually build a career. And that really bothered me because at the end of the day, all of us building in closed silos at companies doesn't quite further our joint mission, right? You know, there's a lot of rework in that. There's a lot of duplicative efforts. And so one of the main objectives about the accelerator, and if I can just sort of kind of take a step back and explain parts of that accelerator, is we as GitHub want to start really small with a specific set of folks where we can really show, irrespective of geography, irrespective of career level, irrespective of, you know, the connections and the people that you have an ability to be connected to the internet and build a project that can be your livelihood. You know, there's no boundaries as far as open source go. It's a global community that you can access anywhere. And so, you know, one part of the accelerator is we're going to put our money where our mouth is. For the 10 weeks that you're with us, we're going to actually pay and give you a stipend so that you can support your life in whatever way and actually have the choice of doing this full time. And then on the other side of it, you know, you get connected to this global community of mentors that, you know, you might not be able to meet if you're running the streets of Lagos or Joburg or wherever you are. But you actually, you know, we're all in the cloud now. We don't actually live anywhere. And so you can actually build a business or build a career without any barriers based on your location. So I think that's one big part of it. Ezra Olobi, who I actually met on that trip, who is the CTO of Paystack, you know, it's a YC-backed company that's fintech now owned by Stripe, but they really showed a great example of what this could look like. You know, they started out in Lagos and are a globally competitive company within the Stripe family. So, you know, I think that was a big part of what this accelerator is about. And I hope that many of the participants aren't from the classical backgrounds of people in the US where I am or Western Europe, but actually kind of span the globe because it is a global talent marketplace. And I don't think that should be a barrier to whether or not you can contribute and you can build a career here. So definitely a big, my resounding feel right now is, yes, I agree. And so we should be doing something about this overall.
So Abby, I know that you're, as you mentioned earlier, actually, you're head of the open source maintainer program. And I learned about that by accident, kind of, through the grapevine. And when I learned more about what exactly that is, I was like, wow, this is really cool. And I didn't know, I had no idea GitHub does this. So I would love you to tell us a little bit more about what that program is and how somebody or some organization or whatever on GitHub can become part of that program.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, did you learn from the Mozvet Slack, I'm assuming?
Exactly.
So yeah, we do have a set of programs that engage different types of open source maintainers on GitHub. We are still building out a lot of this work. But right now, we're doing a lot of work with the Top Maintainers program. So these are maintainers of key large open source projects that are working at scale and with big impact on the ecosystem. So we used a few things to sort of gather this. First was some data. We called it OctoRank, which is just looking at like sort of the size of the community on GitHub, the forks, the stars, and different metrics that we have. But also a lot of manual curation, just looking at the ecosystem and seeing which projects we thought like should be part of this. And so for this group, we do meet with them regularly to provide both like a private space for peer learning, but also like support, just one-on-one support to make sure that they're getting what they need out of GitHub and that GitHub can really support their communities and continue to grow. And they're also a nice platform for testing out new features and just getting feedback from these people who are running the open source that is so dependent on by our whole digital infrastructure. So this is quite a different, it's a different, can't think of that word. It's a different background profile of open source maintainers than some of the broader maintainers that we're seeing. So these are people that are normally like fully employed to do this work. And they're working on giant products and not really the small items. So we're also, for the broader open source community of maintainers. We do things like Maintainer Month. We mentioned a little bit the bulk sponsorships. That was part of a Maintainer Month experiment. Like we wanted to see if we can give this money to maintainers efficiently and fairly. So just distributing it equally. Everyone got about $500 USD. So we partnered with sponsors and OSPO for that, the open source program office here. But we are still building out our Breadth Maintainers program, so ways that we can just help your average open source maintainer who maybe isn't full-time paid at a company to do this, or who's just starting out, or who's running a project that's really highly dependent on by a lot of people, but maybe it's not as visible, so it's maybe lower down on the stack. So it's a little bit harder for people to see that and want to contribute. So a lot of what I'm thinking about over this next year, actually, now that we're at the end of the year and I'm starting to plan, like how do we better engage this broader group of Breadth maintainers, and how do we give them a place to really learn from each other, and just be successful as maintainers. So yeah, if people are interested, reach out, let me know what you need.
Yeah, that's great. No, it's fine. Yeah, no, we'll share the necessary information so people can connect with you. I think it's invaluable service to people, and yeah, there's so many things going on at GitHub. It's like the JavaScript ecosystem. It's nearly impossible to keep up with. So I'm glad you're sharing all of these things. Talking about supporting various people. One of the other things, so I told when I mentioned the 3%, I saw there was another metric that I was curious about, and that is around contributions from people who identify as female. Now, there was a study done, so first of all, according to data, it says that around 13% of contributions to open source comes from people who identify as female. Again, a very low number if you take in the ratio in populations. But moreover, there was a study done to look at this idea of masking contributors' identity when they open a pull request. And so all you see is an avatar with a nondescript username and code. So that's all you have to go on. And what they found is when it's like that, more pull requests from female contributors were accepted than from male. Whereas when you take the blinders off, it reverses. It goes back to this statistic, which is interesting. So there's some theories around why, because one of the reasons why you would merge a pull request is because it's high quality, right? So they were asking also the question of, why is female contribution such high quality, and why is it missed when you connect the identity to the code? So there's, I guess, cultural things going on there that's a little tough to identify and address. But the other thing is, it's this whole concept that, yet again, referring to another study, they found that a female is only likely to apply for a job if she feels she can fulfill 100% of the job requirements. And we all know what job requirements look like. And, for the most part, it's almost impossible to fill 100% of what is requested on the job application. Whereas men will apply if they can only satisfy roughly 65% of it. So it's this weird disconnect. So I wonder if GitHub has done any research, done any experimentation, have any additional insights. Do you have any ideas around this? How can we make this healthier? But I want to preface, before I hand it back to you, I want to preface that with another piece of interesting information. So there's a person called Jaron Lanier. I believe he's at Microsoft Research still. He was the father of virtual reality. He talks a lot about social media, and he has an interesting theory that he shared where he says the interesting thing that he's found is GitHub is the most successful open social network on the internet. And I've never really put those two together, the social network aspect and the code thing, but it's there. It's always been there. I mean, there's even a shirt that I have from GitHub that says social coding. So the social aspect of it has always been part of GitHub. And his theory is that the reason why GitHub is getting the social aspect right, let's just leave the 13% on the shelf for right now, is because there's this sense of a shared ownership. And there's this creative pursuit that's happening where people are making things together and they share this ownership in these things they're making. And all the other social networks have none of that. You have creators and you have consumers, and the one serves the other. You almost don't have collaborative things. The interesting thing is maybe that's why TikTok is so successful, because it has a little bit more of a collaborative aspect where you can riff off another person's video and put your little thing spin on it. So that's a lot of like theories and ideas and research and stuff. So I just love to like give the floor over to the two of you and just speak to whatever resonated in all of that with you.
I do think I remember that study you mentioned where like the women identified profiles, when they masked them in GitHub, the pull requests were accepted a little bit earlier. Was that a Mozilla research study? Am I remembering that correctly?
Mozilla had this idea. It was abandoned, but the study I read wasn't directly based off of the Mozilla initiative, but the Mozilla one had pretty much the same results.
Yeah. I was just going to ask, Naytri, do you have like Dimitri's work with All In? Because I remember her sharing the study that they did as research preparing for this All In program, just to really help increase diversity in open source. I'm trying to look it up now so I can share a little bit more. But I think when they were looking at it, a good percentage of open source contributors said that they felt welcome. Like it was like really high, 80s or 90s. But then if they looked at the underrepresented groups, so those like that did not identify as men, or from like different underrepresented groups, within that, it was much lower. It was like closer to 50-60% that actually felt like they were welcome in open source communities. So just understanding that disconnect was really big for her. And then she built out this all-in program, which really partnered with HBCUs, the historically Black universities and colleges in the US, to provide internships for underrepresented groups and get them into open source. So I apologize if I'm getting those numbers wrong, but I think that's like the rough percentages that they had. And Naytri, I'll let you chime in if you could think of anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I did want to touch on the social coding aspect, Skulk, because I think that's really core to what GitHub is, which is ultimately when you think about the community on GitHub and how they're building together, it is a social endeavor. It's something that, you really depend on this team of people that you may have never even met. You may never meet. You don't even know what their names are, right? You're just got the GitHub handle. And that sort of pursuit that you were talking about, Yaron speaks to as well, is really beautiful. Like the fact that you have an entire community of folks that you can build with together that you may never know, that you will never know. But that you are building on the work of others. You're sort of standing on shoulders of giants, if you want to use the often used colloquial phrase, right? And I think that's what makes me so happy that GitHub exists and that there's open source. Open source would still exist outside of GitHub, but it certainly made it easier that a simple pull request could enable you to learn from and work with some of the best people in the industry or the type of technology that you're working on. So I really appreciate that, there is this sense that GitHub isn't just a fully consumptive or the classic social network experience, but rather is a productive pursuit where people actually want to move things forward together. You're not getting eyeballs because you said something controversial or you've been kind of a jerk in some social networks, right? But that actually you are helping someone do something, or you're adding to this global network of knowledge that exists on GitHub. So for that reason, it's a company that I'm proud to work for, but also a community that I'm proud to be a part of. And then to the point around, underrepresented voices and things like that, I think a lot of this is about being able to share examples of folks who have done this successfully. And I think open source over the last 20 years has really changed in its overall makeup. I think we have a lot to do moving forward, but I am sort of heartened just by the overall group that have come through all in, like Abby was talking about, as well as many of the campus advocates and the thousands of GitHub education participants, that makeup is vastly different than the current GitHub community today. So I'm sort of heartened and excited about what the future entails on that side.
Yeah. I'm always, I don't know, I'm grateful that GitHub exists for so many reasons, but yeah, I don't know where I always wonder where open source would have been now if it wasn't for companies like GitHub. I mean, like you said, GitHub is like not the only one. There's GitLab and there's other ones. GitHub is by far the biggest place where social coding is happening. And I 100% agree that the social aspect is key to GitHub from the beginning and more so now, I guess. And talking to the controversial thing that gets you noticed, it's quite the opposite on GitHub. Like that gets you kicked off the platform so quickly. It's not tolerated. It's as if the community on GitHub has decided that we want this thing to be healthy and we're going to do our damnedest to keep it that way. So, GitHub has put things in place to assist with that. But the community itself is doing a lot with that, because I've been involved in a whole bunch of open source projects, and probably the biggest one is MDN WebDocs. And I mean, as the community manager, I interact with the community, obviously, on a daily basis. And, since I've been the community manager officially in April this year, I can count on one hand how many times we've had to kick somebody off. And that is, that's unheard of on a social platform where 4 or 5 people maybe in a span of 6-7 months that has stepped over the line. And it's been not really that disruptive because we were able to pick it up so quickly, or with this way that you can report internally inside your GitHub repos, a community member would flag it for us, and we'd wake up and GitHub shows you a little nice notification bar at the top saying there's one unresolved report that you need to address. You go right in there, you can see the context, what happened, and you can say, yep, this is not acceptable. You do the thing, you report them to GitHub, and you ban them and block them from your project. Everything turns into the little ghost avatar and all their stuff's gone and you can move on with the rest of your day. So yeah, it's really amazing. And I mean, the only thing is I constantly go back to how do we encourage a more diverse audience to join in? And I wonder sometimes if the audience isn't more diverse than we think, because I've also heard that there's a lot of people from underrepresented audiences that purposefully change who they represent as on a platform such as this to not be judged, to not be excluded. So I wonder if you really dig into the details, which, I don't think that would be very ethical, but if you put that on the side, I think there's probably a larger percentage of underrepresented people contributing, but they're not being themselves, and that sucks. You should never feel ashamed of who you are. You should never hide who you are just to contribute to something. You should be celebrated for contributing for who you are, not who you represent yourself to be, just to not be pushed out. Yeah, I can keep talking about this thing for a long time because it's something that I'd really like to.
Oh, no. What all I was going to say is, you touched on a really important part of this, which is GitHub has this unique ability to allow communities to police themselves. I say police, not in a scary way, but more of hey, this is how normal human interaction actually works, right? Which is if you're in a friend group and someone's a jerk, you're we're not talking to this person anymore. And something that the internet disrupted was this normal mode of being a human, what our interactions were going to be. And, a lot of what I think about with open source is commits and code are really important, but a lot of it is this unseen work of people who are managing the issues, managing the community, talking through discussions, helping people get onboarded, showing up what good first issues can look like. And, I think there's a lot that we don't talk about what happens on GitHub in building really healthy community interactions. And in other social networks, this just doesn't happen because there's no productive work to be done. It is merely a consumptive activity. And so, all I want to say is that, like, I really appreciate and love that you're sort of shining a light on a lot of the non-coding. Like, there's a lot of non-coding aspects that occur on GitHub, like community management, that really make a huge difference in how that project is successful and how we function. So I think I'm glad that GitHub is giving you the tools. I'm hoping that we're continuing to give you more tools. Last conference, we just talked about, you can now turn off all of your profile settings. So, people don't know who you are from the profile setting view, but you can still contribute to open source in the public. And I thought that was a really important way where, I agree with you. Like, it sucks. Like, you shouldn't be hiding who you are, but if you don't want to share who you are, sometimes people have preferences. I never wanted to be in the phone book back in the 90s. Like, people remember that stuff. But you should be able to do that and then still productively be an active participant in open source communities. And I think giving people the choice and then the tools to do that is a really important aspect of encouraging people from all backgrounds to be able to contribute.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in and say I do appreciate how GitHub has added so much to the product over time to really help encourage that. So especially like the code of conduct picker and just like surfacing the code of conduct on the main repo page so it's not just hidden as another file there. I think that made a huge difference in adoption of code of conducts across the open source ecosystem. And then even more recently, one thing I've been hearing a lot from the large open source projects is they want to add a little reason on why they've banned someone. Because they found that people kept coming back with different parts of the org or different projects. And I appreciate that, like, it's on the roadmap now. Like, people are listening to this and adding like small tweaks that can make a big difference in how a community is interacting.
Yeah. And again, there's just an exemplary example again where GitHub's listening and actually doing something, which is rare. Oftentimes companies say, we care, we want to hear what you need, and you speak up and nothing happens. So yeah, it's great. It's great. I do want to make sure, like, GitHub is responding to its developers, not so like, I don't want us to take all the credit. This is definitely, the community is pushing us this way, and it's the community that should really be the one that's highlighted. But yes, I'm glad we implemented it, but certainly not all the ideas were coming from us. I'll say that. No, for sure. But the fact that GitHub actually truly listens, there's a difference between listening and just being a void into which people scream. I know a lot of these ideas and things come from the community, but the fact that GitHub takes it to heart and say, you know what, this is a good idea, let's do this. That is not something that happens a lot. You can look at a lot of like big corporate companies and you'll find that you ask for a feature or you report a bug and 2 years later it's still there. And you're like, okay, I guess they don't truly care about the people who use their software or hardware or whatever the case may be. So 3 big initiatives were announced at Universe. The first one was, like I mentioned earlier, where GitHub is investing in its own stack. And then there was 2 other. The one is focused on enabling people to potentially quit their day job and make open source their career, either as a means to an end or as a means to something bigger, whatever that might be. And then the other one, which was in partnership with M12, which focuses again on investing in open source, but there the focus is very much on developer tools. So I had two kind of questions related to that. The first one is just more information about the first. And then the second one is, when you are looking at the developer tools, is there a specific focus there, or is it just like general, any kind of tooling that improves developer productivity or whatever the case may be?
Yeah, so I'll take the first one first and then go to the second one. So for the first one with the GitHub Accelerator, I'm just going to take a step back. So we talked a lot about OS grants and how that was an experiment in India. And we wanted to take that experiment in India and really expand it globally and make it a much more tailored program for folks. And I think, I want to start with just like sort of the problem statement, because this is what I heard when I talked to a lot of maintainers. It's like, you've got a great project, thousands of people are using it, maybe even millions for all we know. But, if you squint just hard enough, it could be your full-time career. It could be a full-time company. But right now, when you look at open source, like, it's sort of ironic because open source was the original creator community on the internet. I mean, it literally built the internet as they were working together. And in some ways, there's this V path for you as a developer. Either you're going to go and do 100% employment at a company. And sometimes, for a lucky few, they actually get to work on their open source project while at that company. I can think of the VS Code team at Microsoft or Flutter at Google. A lot of different teams actually exist within big tech companies. And you're seeing more and more examples of this, like the Next.js community or DragonflyDB. I can rattle off a ton of them. But at the end of the day, that's still full-time employment at a company. And then on the other side of the V curve, you could become a founder. You could actually start a company, but oftentimes that means raising money from VCs, signing up to a really exponential growth curve. And then, oftentimes 5 years out, you might be looking back on your career and say, hey, I became the CEO of this amazing company, but I'm not a developer anymore. I'm a CEO, I'm in management. I'm not just deving on my own. And maybe I don't want to build a team, or maybe I don't want to sign up for this dramatic growth curve that then makes a bunch of promises to people and things like that. And so we saw this V curve, and then there's this huge missing middle. It's like, wow, what about all of the businesses that independent developers or independent companies could be? In some ways, I'm sort of looking for like that missing Fortune 5 million of software companies. You don't have to be a VC-backed company. You don't have to do all these things. But in reality, you could build a really nice lifestyle business. And this isn't a fantasy. This actually happens on the internet a lot. Like if you're an amazing carpenter, you can have an Etsy storefront and you actually build a really healthy business that sustains you and your family. And there are no further, requirements of you. Or if you're in e-commerce, you knit beautiful sweaters, or you have an awesome bar that you want to build, whatever it is, right? Like you can get a Shopify storefront and you can actually like build a business on that. And you have someone who handles all of the infrastructure and needs for you. And then you get to just focus on that one thing that you want to do. But software doesn't have that. You kind of have this like V curve. You have to choose like, okay, are you going to go work for a company, or are you going to go start a company? And then, yes, I think on the margins, you've seen some people who do consulting contracts and things like that, but that often atomizes development and makes you think of just like an hourly worker versus like a true project where this is like the full on business. And so we're looking at this and like, well, so how do we create more of this missing middle? And, one of the advisors in the accelerator actually is this person named Mike Perham, and he started Sidekick and really did an amazing job. You go to Sidekick, go to the website. It's like, this is a full-fledged business. You think it's like 400 people behind it. No, it's like one person. And he has a very active, healthy community that helps him build Sidekick, but they're not trying to be something that they don't want to be. And so one of the things that we're really excited about is having more examples of that. And so with the accelerator, what we're doing is we're saying, we're going to take 10 weeks. We're going to give you the money. Like I said earlier, we're going to give you mentorship. But we want to see so many different examples of people. Maybe it is that you want to go and work for a company on your open source project or not. Maybe this is your discovery way to really show off a new skill set that you have, a unique perspective on, and someone wants to hire you for that. Maybe it's that you want to be an independent developer where you have 50 sponsors who are helping you support this really critical software project that sits in a lot of people's software supply chains. Maybe you want to start a company, but not sign up for this VC-backed, growth curve, but actually, build what I would say like a lifestyle business for you and your family. Or maybe you want to go and start a big company and, take VC money and go the full gamut. But we want to give all of those options available to people. And I think the big thing here is, how do you create more examples? And ways for people to just say, hey, that's the career I want to take, not this or that, but, I want to work on this open source project, and it can be the thing that sustains me for the long term. So that's really the big objective behind the accelerator. And then I can go over to the fund, which is slightly different, but probably along the path.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
So on the fund side, as we think about that trajectory, you're building a career, you're building a company. Maybe you do actually want to start that big, company, VC money, et cetera. One thing that we really recognize on GitHub is that there are so many companies that are built on GitHub every day, and we don't have really a hand in that at all, other than, being the platform that supports them. And often the best tools for developers are built in open source because everyone understands how they're being built. They can contribute back if they see a feature or a thing that needs to be, built on the margin. And what we started to realize is that it's sort of silly that GitHub doesn't help any of these businesses come to fruition. It doesn't help any of these developer tools kind of cross that chasm into, a full-fledged developer product. And so what we wanted to do was create a way for us to invest in the community. And this is an investment fund. It's actually backed by, like you were saying, it's called M12, which is Microsoft's venture arm. We have two great partners in Todd Graham and Priyanka Mitra, who are both part of the investment team. And we're looking to really support people in that really crucial period where you're going from like a pre-seed to seed, maybe possibly seed to Series A, part of the journey, where GitHub's insight and how open source products are actually built, and how you interact with the community, how you end up moving into an enterprise product, how you, build a relationship with both the community side as well as the customer side. I think that's something that GitHub is really uniquely positioned for, and something that we really want to help more maintainers become CEOs of really great developer tools companies. When we say developer tools, they really run the gamut. The example, our first investment is CodeC, which we were super excited about partnering with Shania and team. And they really sit at the heart of the code review process, as well as discovering new repositories as you get started. And so for us, it was a really complementary investment. It made sense because it is so stitched into how GitHub should be working, as well as what developers need when they're trying to understand a code base. They're rocking up to the thing first time. They're like, well, what happens if I do this or that? How does this all flow through? So I think they're a great example. But as we look out across, we committed a $10 million sum to the fund, and we'll be looking to do a set of investments over the next year. One of the key components is going to be, is this a tool that really helps developers in their DevOps lifecycle? And the second is really, are they building it with a community in mind, whether that's, an open core model, or with an open source community that is really helping advance and augment the product itself. So that's sort of the objective behind the fund. I think we've got a lot of work to do, and a lot of, ways to show how this partnership actually works. But I think we've gotten a great start, and we're excited to partner with more CEOs in the space.
Yeah, that's super great. Yeah, I think that's perfect. Those two pair perfectly together. I'm curious just on the first one, the accelerator. Who can apply for the accelerator?
Yeah. So the first class is going to be super experimental. So what I want to say is, if you're thinking about any of this, if you're really excited about it at all, please apply. We'll figure it out together. But I think if I had to pick the right lens, it's someone who has already got an existing open source project. You have a good, healthy set of users who are already depending on your software. You have a view on how you want to take this full time. You understand what this could look like, but you probably don't have all the answers on, this is a company, this is a that, this is a that. You just really want to be able to quit your job, work for the internet, and work on your open source project full time. And then, I think one thing that is really important to us is we want to source developers from across the world. We're not just looking for one geography. It's a fully remote program so that it's able to be participated. You can participate in it from anywhere. And so for us, it's really about, either individuals or teams of 2 or 3 at max, who want to be able to take something that's quite a successful open source project out in the world today into, either a new company or a new career for all the participants. So that's the main objective that we're thinking about. And then, like I said, if you're still thinking about it, if you're like, oh, I don't quite fit, like, please just still apply. We'll talk to you and have a conversation and see what we can do.
Great. Abby, so stepping over to maintaining and running this actual open source thing and the tools that GitHub provide, post Universe, I completed a survey that was sent to me. And as I mentioned before, it clearly felt like it was heavily focused around almost community management, like what I'm doing. I felt like a lot of the questions were pertinent to me and what I would need from GitHub. And so I'm curious if you're aware of any like initiatives inside GitHub that's, brewing in alpha stages or something that is around this way of enabling community managers or, like that kind of task-oriented thing to give people more tools to be able to do this better. Like I've mentioned, there's some challenges like keeping your eyes on like a big org like WebDocs that has like 50 repositories, for example, and then have discussions happening and stuff like that. Are you aware of anything that's coming out of GitHub?
Yeah, well, first, huge thanks for filling out that survey. We appreciate your data and your input there. And I do want to tell you a little bit about the survey itself. So that was actually run by Grace Forder. She's the research partner for the Communities org. And that survey really was to learn how we can help maintainers build community. So exactly what you're looking at. And we want to hear exactly from people like you so that we can build, we can build products that, it's okay, bless you, Naytri.
Thank you.
We do want to be able to build products that really help maintainers do this. And a big reason why I came to GitHub actually was because they put this communities org together. So it's run by Stormy Peters, who you may have overlapped with at Mozilla Skulk. So she was working on MDN back in the day. But when I saw that she had she had moved over from Microsoft over to GitHub, I got really excited. And it was nice to see that they were putting this whole part of the org together that's meant to really serve the open source community and really support the open source community. So part of that is an engineering team that builds products like discussions, like you mentioned, achievements, the feed and the profile. But it also includes parts like education, DevRel with open source, and docs, because documentation is a big part of this too. So, yes, there is lots of things on the radar for open source maintainers for building community. I can't talk about very many of them, but we did launch a bunch of stuff over at GitHub Universe, and like the biggest ones lately is like GitHub sponsors, the bulk sponsorships. I think that would be great for maintainers. But I did want to say that there is a whole part of the org and like hundreds of people thinking about this and working on this. So if you have input, fill out surveys, please. Reach out to me, reach out to us, let us know your feedback and what pain points that you have or what like feature requests that you have, because we really do want to be helping you thrive on GitHub.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I'm super excited to see what's coming out. Like now I'm even more excited.
I forgot to say, so the survey itself, I did ask Grace a little bit about what they found there. And like we've been talking about, they found that a lot of maintainers are doing this in their spare time, because we surveyed the top 1,000. So maintainers for the top 1,000 open source projects using the same rank that we did for the top maintainers that I mentioned before, but also contributors and users. And so many of these maintainers were just doing this in their spare time, and really community building was quite a low priority for them just because they're just trying to survive as an open source project, or they're trying to grow the project in the first place. So the survey responses will help us prioritize making discussions more useful, especially for Q&A type questions. We found that was really helpful. And we want to learn how to incentivize the community to help each other out. Big feedback we heard was like maintainers felt like they were the ones answering all of the stuff on discussions. So that's really what the research found. So I think we'll be able to see some work in that area soon.
Yeah, it's super exciting. I'm really glad to hear that because I do think there is definitely a opportunity for GitHub there, where there is definitely a need, and the fact that you all are thinking about it is wonderful. So in closing, this was a wonderful conversation, and I'm excited about all the things that GitHub's doing and the things that's coming down the pipeline. I'd like to hear from each of you. What are your hopes for open source and open source communities and the role open source can play in bettering our world?
Before I answer that, can I answer your other question that I heard when I could hear you, but had to leave off? You're asking about like task lists and roadmaps and stuff. Yeah, I just want to say people are so excited about that. The task list feature. That's the first time a maintainer asked me if they can turn it on their org before I even knew what it was. So the day it was staff shipped, so it was available for me as staff, but I hadn't opened an issue yet. I got a message from CNCF. They were like, "Oh, can you turn this on for us?" I was like, "What are they talking about?" And it wasn't until I actually opened an issue and I saw it, I was like, "Oh, this is what they want." They found out so fast and they were so excited about it. So I agree with you. Like these tools that can help you actually manage your project and do the work without leaving the GitHub platform, I think it's so valuable for maintainers. And it's really exciting to see that come through. So coming up, I know a big thing for open source that I'm excited about, they're going to be releasing a secret scanning for public repositories. So that's launching December 13th. So by the time this podcast comes out, it should be there. But right now, secret scanning is only available for GitHub Advanced Security, which is like an add-on for enterprise. But now on all public repositories, you'll get notifications if like secrets are accidentally committed to your code. So I think this will be huge for open source and just making sure that we're keeping open source secure, because I know security has been a huge topic the last few years, especially. So that's what I'm kind of excited about product-wise. And now I can answer your other question, Skulk. Yeah, and I think it's a big question that you have, and sort of what are my hopes for the open source ecosystem? I think I want to keep seeing maintainers supported, and I do want to see your average maintainer supported. I think we're doing a great job with the most visible people, and there already are structures in place for them to get like the grant funding and like the sponsors funding. But I would like to see more from your average maintainer who maybe is a little bit less visible. Maybe they're not creating the flashy content or streaming. So it's a little bit harder for them to get the attention. So I do want to create spaces for that group to get the support they need, both financially, but also just from each other. It is really lonely maintaining a community. You don't have a ton of peers that you can turn to. So even just creating a space where people can talk to each other. This is a lot of what I'm thinking about now. I'm thinking about how can we curate this kind of community for maintainers to learn from each other so that the whole community can just level up and we can have better open source.
I couldn't agree more with, yeah, I mean, I can't agree more with Abby. As I said at the start, we want open source to thrive. And this is not something that we, are thinking about on a 1 or a 2 or a 4-year scale. It's on a decade level scale because our whole world runs on open source. It doesn't matter if you're a tech company or any company. I mean, you look at the light bulbs in your room, the car that you drive, the software that you use on your computer every day, all of it depends on open source. And it is really our responsibility and our interest as, a community of developers to make sure that it can support itself and have the right community members and connections so that people continue to contribute to open source instead of, again, going back into their closed silos and starting to do the same work that everyone else is doing. And I think, as we've seen over the last decade, like open source is really one. It's the model that just makes sense and will continue to do a better job than people working alone. And so to the extent that we can give maintainers the tools that they need to manage their community or run their software and the support they need financially and I want to say like mentally or psychologically, spiritually, whatever it is, so that people really feel welcome in the community and know that they can build their careers and their companies for the long term. So hopefully we're making some steps towards that. And I know we got a lot more work to do and we just need to continue forward.
Yeah, that's all great. I love that. I love it. Yeah, no, for me as well. I see open source playing a key role in how we work together and what we make. And I think think there's a lot of promise, and I think there's a lot of opportunities for people in places like Africa, India, all these developing nations. I think there's a lot of, by enabling people to make things, I think it'll naturally be a positive impact on communities. And when communities get healthy, it just, it rolls over, and it eventually it flows into the country as a whole, and countries, and then the globe as a whole. So I think this is a wonderful thing. I've been in open source for so long that I can't even imagine myself working or doing anything else. So I want to again thank both of you for joining me. I really, really appreciate this. It means a lot to me that GitHub is so open to speaking with the community, which you've proven again today. And so thanks for everything you do, and, keep doing it. The whole open source community is behind you. So thanks very much. Thank you for listening to the Mechanical Inc. podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with your friends. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Have something to add? Continue the conversation on GitHub and join the community on Slack. Until the next one, keep all the things open.